Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Go Live series of the Follow Our Journey Through Radical Remission Coach Training. Today, Jessica and I are going to discuss how to make the most out of each coaching session. We will explore expectations, goal setting, and session structure to optimize the benefits of working with a coach in the setting of radical remission and holistic health and wellness coaching. So, this week, we're going to discuss the point of view of a coaching client, and next week, we will discuss the same topic from the perspective of the coach. So, back in our fourth week of our Go Live series, we started discussing what health and wellness coaching is. But today we're going to take that conversation a step further. And before we do that, I just want to remind everyone of the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches definition of coaching, because I find this the most thorough definition. So, I'm reading this just from their website. So, they say that health and wellness coaches partner with clients seeking self-directed, lasting changes aligned with their values, which promotes health and wellness and thereby enhances well-being. In the course of their work, health and wellness coaches display unconditional positive regard for their clients and a belief in their capacity for change, and honoring that each client is an expert on his or her life while ensuring that all interactions are respectful and non-judgmental.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for reestablishing that coaching foundation. That definition always brings me home. And in its pure form, that's what coaching is. It's always client driven, the person being coached. And one of the things that I love about coaching is that the person being coached, the client, is the expert. And that's really important, right? In distinguishing a coaching relationship from other professional relationships, and also a beautiful reminder to bring that coaching dynamic or this unconditional positive regard and respect into, I try to bring it into all my interactions now. And so another beautiful thing about that, we're going to talk today about, right, how to optimize coaching session from the view of a client is because this is client-based, no one else can do this work for you or take you where you need to go. Someone can guide you, be with you along the way, and that's where coaching is powerful. And the other caveat to this, which we're going to explore in this conversation, is that coaching is process-driven, which is something that I love. Outcomes are important. We're going to talk about setting goals, but the coaching process itself, it depends on the coach, on the person being coached. So, for instance, people might experience life coaching, holistic health and wellness coaching, books, and here we're talking about radical remission coaching as well. And your coach, especially in the realm of health and wellness coaches, they will have most professional expertise in other areas where they are licensed or credentialed to lend their expertise. But in that situation, you as a client have enriched experience because you have a coach who puts on a consulting hat and puts on a coaching hat. So it actually works really well. Just personally, after going through some coaching myself a little bit, I just finished my first book manuscript, and the first coach that I worked with had never written before. They had professional editing experience, and it just didn't work well. So for me, when I try to work with somebody, it's important that even though it is client-driven, that I'm working who has that practical experience as well. It just brings a whole level of integrity that's really important, if possible. It's not going to be possible in all situations, but that was just something personal. So with that, I know we're going to talk about structure.
Yeah, you had mentioned that this work has to be done by the individual, not by the coach. And then you said, but a coach can help guide. And I think how that guidance is done is through structure. So I believe that structure is very important. And after just sitting for the National Health and Wellness Board certification exam, they obviously do too, because there are a bunch of questions on coaching structure in that exam. So no matter if the coach you're working with is bringing you through a program, so say like Radical Remission or whatever personal program that they might have, or that you're doing group coaching, it's my personal opinion that there's always need for structure. So from a client perspective, why is this important? So when your coach has a structure that you're following, it allows you to know what to expect. What are your expectations? What are the coach's expectations? And it creates consistency and accountability in the process. So for me personally, just to give an example, the structure that I follow with my coaching clients is there's always an opening. I want to become aware of how you're showing up to our session. I want to be able to meet you where you're at. Everybody's not always going to come into a coaching session high energy and ready to go. So I like to really understand where a client's coming from. The next is grounding. So how do we come together in this shared space? So some sort of meditation is generally done based on the client's needs. Sometimes that's a relaxing meditation. Sometimes it's a moving meditation, whatever the client may need. And then we check in on the self-work that the client had assigned themselves the previous session. So have you met your last session goals? What are your wins? What were the barriers? And then we shift to the focus of today's session. So what do you want to focus on today as the client? And sometimes that's aligned with what we did last session. Sometimes it's not. It's whatever is coming up for that client in that day. And then once we work through all of that, we always want to assign ourselves some self-work, some goals for the next session. So setting those SMART goals, something that's manageable and relevant to your big goal. And then takeaways. I always want to know, what is the client now walking away with this session? And what takeaways do for the client, in my opinion, is provide that reflection for them. That look back on what just happened over this time and what am I walking away with. And then, of course, feedback is always, always, always welcome. I think we've talked about this a couple of times. We love feedback. So I always want to hear what I could be doing better to help my clients. So structure sounds very concrete, but it's not. This is like a flowy structure based on what the clients need. So sometimes we spend more time in one area than the other, and sometimes we get stuck in an area for a little while, and that's all okay. But having this structure provides accountability for both client and coach. So my personal coaching sessions are generally speaking about 60 minutes. And again, generally speaking, my clients are usually starting with approximately 8 to 12 sessions.
Thank you for sharing how you do things. I know you and I went to the same coaching school, but everyone brings their own nuances to coaching. I really love the word that you used, flowing, and incorporating that into structure, because one of the other things that we both do and believe in is having a uniquely integrative and holistic model of coaching. And so incorporating that into structure. So it's like having structured flow, if that makes sense. So integrative, in terms of having integrative and holistic coaching, integrative basically means working with and incorporating multiple modalities into our coaching sessions. So mind body techniques, imagery, yoga, breath work, relaxation, and more. And that just helps even further impact the holistic experience of coaching, right? Looking at the individual as a whole. And so, as you had mentioned, you like to open up with an opening and a grounding and that self-awareness. I'd like to incorporate that holistic mind-body piece also in the beginning structure with meditation, because what I find is, and this is just personally, before doing anything, even before our sessions today, we did some breath work together that ground that fight or flight, go, go, go. And when you get to do these mind-body techniques, not only do you actually stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of you that makes you relax, I find that it just completely opens up thinking. So some people might come in with imagine as if the sun came in and cleared up a cloud. That's kind of a metaphor that comes to me with this. So it's kind of beautiful, but to keep that structure. So every session, the client knows they're going to get, if they want it, obviously nothing is ever. And the other thing about the flowy part is that you can't sometimes plan meditations or imagery or what you're going to do, really what the situation demands for. And so this isn't rocket science in a way. It's really about being present. Both you as a client and as a coach, we have to be present. And so I love that presentness. And then also, you had mentioned a little bit more too about your session structure in terms of timing and like how many you had recommended, Cheryl. And I do agree that the structure is really important. I offer just a couple different lengths because sometimes people want more of the mind body stuff, which you also offer as well. And so basically, it's really important just to be present, right? So whatever the present design need is at that time. And you had talked about takeaways and like little baby steps and accountability with goals, basically. I also like to offer reading suggestions, and if there is anything else I can do, the reflection is a big piece, with journaling, especially because when you take a course and you get a certificate, it's like, I did this. When you do inner work, there's no linear pathway. How do you see where you're going or where you came from? And so for that, journaling is a huge asset.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing that goes along with this structure a little bit is that we hadn't mentioned yet is the assessment session. So both you and I'm sure many or most coaches have an assessment session, and that can look very different from coach to coach. But I think it's a good point to bring up because from the client perspective, this is where they can also see if this coach works for them, right? It's not just, okay, here we are, we're starting together, let's go. You might realize in that initial session that it's not a good fit, and that is absolutely okay. It's going to happen at some point that you don't have the perfect fit. And so in these sessions, what coaches can do is use different tools. They can use assessments to help just get to know their clients better, get to understand what their clients' goals are, gets to understand the client's strengths. I think that is super important. As coaches, we like to play off client strengths, right? From a client's perspective, you're going to likely more meet your goals easier if we're encouraging you and learning ways in which you have succeeded in things in the past and applying them to what we're doing now. So getting to know the strengths is really important. And you talked about incorporating all of your training into each session. And I do that as well. I think it's extremely important. So that brings up another great point for clients is to understand, what are you looking for in a coach? In these assessments sessions, when you're able to ask these questions, what are you asking? What are you looking for? And I think one thing to think about, are there certain tools or modalities that you like to use, that you've wanted to explore, that you're familiar with? And is your coach trained in these? So in this initial session, you're able to speak with their coach and ask these questions. What certifications do you have? What credibility do they have? Maybe they're on a path to certification. So for what we're talking about specifically, this health and wellness coaching and radical remission, do they have certifications in those? So another way too is testimonials. I'm sure a coach would be willing to provide any testimonials if you ask for that, or you can find that on their websites or other places.
Those are all great suggestions. And yeah, with that story, right? I would love to know if I'm being coached. What's the story behind my coach? And also, what is my own story, right? The human story. So most professional coaches will, I don't ever want to say all, but yes, coaches will be able to share that information with you, or at least they should if you ask. And word of mouth, right? Sometimes the best things come unintentionally just through talking with people. And I know you had mentioned an assessment. I just want to dive a little deeper into that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. As you were talking about, structure is so important, and an assessment specifically, I usually do it in the first session. I'll have someone fill out an intake before we meet. But the thing is, the assessment and the type of assessment, it usually depends on what the client's looking for. So if it's like holistic health and coaching, it's something. If it's business goals or something, it really depends on what that person is looking for. But the goal of that is to get a big picture of their story. And what's often interesting is the assessment is not, you had mentioned, Cheryl, I love this, about how you need to know what you're looking for in a coach, right? the assessment often brings that clarity. I know every time I personally filled out one, I realize, oh yeah, this is what I'm looking for. So it has that mutual benefit. And so the other thing that's extremely important is setting clear expectations, right? So we talk about structure, we talk about having an assessment, and it's really, really important to have clear expectations of this coaching process. And first, clarity is from within. And then I'm going to bring this back to home, back to
I'm
your.
so sorry, Jessica. It was sorry, you were just cutting off. I was hoping that you could repeat that for us, just in case it was cutting out for others as well.
Sure. Where did you hear to last?
I heard to expectations, clear expectations.
Okay, so I apologize. So yeah, just the structure is important. Having the expectations is extremely important, and the most important person to have the expectation with is yourself, right? Yourself as a client and your coach, obviously, but it's for you. And because coaching is not black and white, it's a process. And it's even if you're coaching for a certain topic like health and wellness or radical remission, whatever it is, it's you drive, right? The client drives. And so basically, one of the richest values of coaching is that the coach helps provide an environment, that space for discovery in a way that's not often created in our home or work environments. And so it's really beautiful way to nurture our inner wisdom. And so with that, when you talk about expectations, so that's done with the assessment session, like you mentioned, coaches will have a coaching agreement. At least I know certified health and wellness coaches definitely will, which is extremely important, which talks about logistics of how you're going to work together. Even things, just as timing and where the sessions will occur. But just again, the emphasis on the fact that this is a process.
Yes, it definitely is, and a very beautiful process. So goal setting is another thing we wanted to address today. So when you're meeting with your coach initially, you're setting a big goal, right? Like your whole intent is to come to accomplish this big goal. But then you can also expect that in each session, you're setting little goals that's on your way, that's kind of guiding you on your way to your primary goal. So you should also be checking in with your coach along the process, or the coach will be checking in with you to assure that, so say you're doing a 12 session coaching journey, maybe every 4 sessions you're checking in. So where are we now in comparison to our big goal? Are we looking like we're going to meet this in approximately the time we estimated? And your goals may be flowy. They're not always going to be linear, and that is okay. Flowy is the word of the day, I guess. It's all about the process. And during the process, you might learn more about yourself. And then you might realize, I don't actually want that to be my goal. And you might change the big goal, and that's okay. And just learning and understanding that that's okay. And when you're setting these weekly goals, you're never failing if you don't meet that goal. Even if you don't meet your big goal, with a coach, you are never failing. So in the coaching environment, there are just learned experiences. There are tries. We tried to do this, and that way didn't work. So we're just going to try something else. There's no such thing as a fail. So that's just an important thing, I think, from a client's perspective, that can kind of set you at ease and remember that as you're going through your journey.
Yes, the emphasis on non-judgment, which sometimes, just personally speaking, the hardest thing for me is not to pass judgment on myself, but know that ideally, and there is a code of ethics too that all coaches have to follow depending on where they're certified, but not having judgment and being very nourishing of this process is really important, and all optimizes this coaching process. And I love the word flowy. It's wonderful because in the present moment, we're always changing. And so keeping the emphasis on being a process and rather than focusing on outcomes. And so to close our go live for today, Cheryl and I wanted to share just some more tangible tips, right? More tips that you can use to optimize your experience, and I'd like to start just by sharing some to optimize your coaching experience if you're a client and you're going into a session. And so basically, one of the most important things is presence, right? You want to be in a private place where you won't be interrupted. And even if your coach is on Zoom, this is a great time to turn off your email alarms, sign out of your messenger apps, because anything, really you want to keep the integrity of the space. And even just these little notifications, we might physically be here, but our mind can run. And so to deepen that space of awareness is being fully present. And obviously the coach should be doing the same, and you'll be able to feel that very tangibly, virtually, or obviously you'll see it in person. You want to be comfortable, right, in order to be present. So if you need to make yourself physically comfortable to do so, it's great. Zoom world is top down, right? Which is amazing. And depending on the other activities being done. So for instance, I like to do yoga incorporated with coaching sessions, whatever it is. If it's mind body techniques or share, I know we both do breathing. I might advise people to eat in advance, depending on what activities we're doing. I personally think that if you come into a coaching session right after eating, depending on the meal, might induce a little bit of sleepiness. That's not true with all meals, just with big meals. The other thing we talked about was definitely bringing a journal, something to write with, and a pen and paper to keep track of highlights of your session. And, if your session is an hour, however long your session is, giving yourself just a few minutes once your session is over between your next task, if you can help it, like before running an errand or going to your next meeting, to just literally write for 5 minutes what your takeaway was. It doesn't have to be long or perfect, but even just those 1 or 2 sentences serves as a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful reflection, and just for you to see where you've been going. And lastly, this goes into the comfort space, but having some water, just something comfortable.
Yeah, so many great points. In a great way to set up the coaching session. I think another important part of the coaching journey is what you're doing in between sessions. So if you want to optimize your coaching experience, I would highly recommend not only being prepared for the sessions, but being prepared to do work in between the sessions. So one thing is focusing on awareness in between sessions. What is coming up for you now? You just did a bunch of self-work, self-exploration. What are your thoughts? What are the things that you're feeling in your body? What are you experiencing between each session? And journaling, I think journaling I encourage all of my clients to journal through the entire process. And I think it's a good place to keep those notes. It's a good place to keep your takeaways, like you had said. And what a kind of beautiful thing to have after your coaching journey is over that you can always refer back to. So yeah, I think journaling that you brought up was excellent. And so to play off of that, just being prepared to dedicate your time. So not just, the hour or however long your coaching session may be, but what are you doing in between that? Jessica had mentioned the 5 minutes after the coaching session to journal, but what about maybe even 10 minutes every morning or every night? Or what are you doing to continue that self-work in between sessions? And then just the understanding, Jessica talked a lot about preparing your body and things like that for your coaching session. And you touched on mine too, but allowing yourself to understand that coaching isn't necessarily an easy process. It's not something you're just going to jump into, do your hour session, and then, next week you're going to come back, that part's done next, and all of a sudden your goal's accomplished with no issues in this amount of time. It's not really so black and white, like you had mentioned earlier. Things can come up for you that you weren't expecting. Your goal could have been simple. I want to lose 5 pounds. Well, next thing you know, after some self-exploration, all of these other things have come up for you. And so just being able to be open to the full experience. And then one of the things I think is the most important is allowing yourself grace. Jessica, you also touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're likely not going to reach every goal that you set every week that you set it. And it may take numerous trying new things and really getting outside of the box, trying things that are uncomfortable. So just allowing yourself that grace that, again, you are not failing, you are trying. And if one try doesn't work, you try again. It's a process. And then, yeah, I think that was all of mine.
What came for me, you know how you said sometimes you work on one thing and then all these other things come up? There's
Yes.
always a root, and the beautiful part about coaching is you get to the root. So even though it seems like things come up, what I find in coaching is that you often find out everything's related. And by working on one aspect, which might be a core aspect, everything gets taken care of in once. So you were talking about flow and it being process, and basically it's to go in knowing that you want to be there. It's just sometimes we don't know what you were saying, what that looks like, and that's perfectly okay. So being okay with what's uncertain or uncomfortable in a way, or just being comfortable with that. And so, and you were talking about the time. So basically, in summary, what you get in, right, is what you get out. So you have your time with a coach. And so I had talked about in session, how to optimize it. Cheryl, you had mentioned in between sessions, which is so important. And if you are investing this time, right, your time away, your time to yourself. And so how much more powerful is that if you continue it every day, whether or not the days you have a session or not? And so we hope that these tips help you. And we're excited because we get to continue this conversation next week by talking about how you as a coach can prepare, nurture yourself, keep your inner space, and while nurturing your clients at the same time, how to optimize the sessions for them.
Yeah, and I think it's going to also be an important, even though we're talking from the coaching perspective, it can be really beneficial for the clients to tune in as well. So you can understand what the prep that your coach is also going through for these sessions. I know we take our coaching very seriously and we want to walk the talk. So a lot goes into preparing for a coaching session just right before and just as a whole. So I think it would be great for clients to understand that as well.
Yep, that's one thing I think I've learned is anytime I've seen someone or something that looks easy, I usually realize there's a lot I don't know about the process that went into making something look so easy. So whether it's showing up for a coaching session and being, like dedicated to yourself and motivated to work, you put effort to be there. And similarly, your coach is putting in that effort too. So thank you everyone so much. We'd love to hear from you, your feedback. How do you best prepare for a coaching session? What do you find helpful? Do any of the techniques we've used work? And we'd love to see you next week.
Yes, we would. See you next week. Take care.